What was the life of the parish like after World War One? That's what we've described as its heyday before World War One.
Yes.
And I gather after World War One, between the two wars, there was quite a lull, particularly with the men not being around.
Yes, I think that was right. There's not very much recorded, not very much said about that. It seems that they carried on the routine fairly well,
Yes.
and it was in the days of Archdeacon Herring, and the 1920s, they were difficult financial years, as you know, and ultimately they came to the Depression. And well, I think they were very grim times. And at the same time, they had Canon. He was a great pastor, and he visited assiduously, and everybody liked him very much indeed. Always went on his bike, and I remember somebody saying to me years later, well, it was so good in the days when the vicar got round on his bike. If he saw you, he'd get off the bike and talk to you. And,
Yes, of course.
he was a real pastor. He was a man who had considerable, shall we say, mental difficulties. Every now and again he'd have something of a breakdown,
Yeah.
but carried on courageously. There's no doubt about it. He was really very good, and that place was looked after very well by him. Now, they were in the Depression years, leading right up and including the war years, and the Second World War.
Yes,
yes. So that I think it needs to be said that not very much happened between the wars. The place went along very well, and there were no problems because they had some fairly substantial people supporting it, you know, people that had at least the means, and indeed the attitude that you did support the church, and therefore it's very interesting that before the war, the income of St Colin Hawthorne was about a third higher than that of Christchurch, South Yarra.
Right.
In the days when Christchurch was really, you know, very upmarket.
Yes, yeah.
So that that was that. I think Canon Winslow undoubtedly he provided the great, or met the great need that you had during those Depression years. They obviously appreciated the sacrifice that had been made by members of the parish in that, remember that wonderful stained glass window in the sanctuary. I remember that's a war memorial, and you see that was done by the best stained glass artist Melbourne's ever had, and that would have cost a lot. And then underneath you see all those names of the men in that very special memorial tablet, which is a silvered copper, I understand. But see, that was made so that it didn't ever discolour or anything like that. And I remember Mrs. Lawrence, who was the widow of Ken and Tom Lawrence, missionaries in Africa. She told me in old age that she didn't ever go to receive the communion without fixing her eye on her brother's name on that memorial. You know, that's how much it meant. And indeed, in my day, I would have liked to have marched with some of my friends at the Anzac Day March, but I could never do that because you see, that always fell on the Saints' Day and St Mark's Day, of course, and Mrs. Ashton and Mrs. Lawrence, the sisters, this man, they always came to that St Mark's Day service, and I couldn't allow that to be taken by the curate, however able, because the vicar would not have taken that seriously, you see, the sacrifice made. So I didn't ever march until I retired.
And Burley went on to become a missionary. That must have been a change.
Yes, although I gather that their mother, a very devout Christian,
Yes.
and of course it would have been appropriate for Burley to have married this obviously very impressive young clergyman, Tom Lawrence, you see. And oh yes, they were very, very, very strong, and everything. See, there are so many memorials that they put in the church, as you all know, and including the font. See, that was a new font they put in.
Okay.
Oh yes.
That was the Lawrence family who gave the font.
No, this was the Ashton family.
Yeah.
Yes, and of course there's a stained glass window to Mr. Lawrence, as you know.
Yes.
And there were a number of other things. They were ones that insisted on putting in the tablet with the vicars of the parish listed.
Yes. I'm curious about this because the place is full of memorials to World War One, but as far as I can gather, there's only two smaller windows dedicated to World War Two.
And of course, the interesting thing is that the two windows that are there to memory of a young man, whose name I forget. As far as I know, he was not an active parishioner or anything.
Oh, is that right?
It was just his a wealthy father who was commemorating his son. Yes, as I understand, that was before my time, of course, but as I understand it, there was no real connection.
There was quite a mission history there as well, around this same time. The Clark sisters.
Oh, yes.
Tom and Burley Lawrence. Could you tell us a bit about what you heard of their ministry?
Yes, well, for instance, in the case of the Clark sisters, they of course went to China, and MM and EJ Clark, as they were known, I met them when they came home from China, and are very active small women. One of them had been the headmistress of a girls' school there run by CMS, and she was assisted by her sister. And when the Japanese came, they still carried on the school until eventually the Japanese said that they wanted the building and had to get out. And indeed, the one who was the principal, she stood up to them and said they couldn't possibly move. Well, eventually they had to move, but it was regarded as very significant that she'd stand up to the Japanese.
Yes, it would have been.
And, she was not going to step down for that. And they were both very vigorous. When they came back after World War II, I remember being at the League of Youth winter camp down in Point Lonsdale, and I sat at the table with them, amongst others, and I think I remember one of them saying, "When are you going to China?" Very significant. Then coming at the same time was Miss Wallen. She went out to India, and she in turn was the son of one of the original founders of the daughter of one of the original founders of St. Colum's. He's mentioned in the documents, he was one of the original trustees, and Wallen Road is named after him. That's down there, near the river, and so that she came from a well-known public family, but her father was a very significant sort of supporter and originator of the parish.
The eagle is dedicated to Mr. Wallen.
Oh, that's right, I'd forgotten that. Yes.
And I had a phone call from the Australian National University from a fellow doing his doctorate on this, on Mr. Wallen. And he told me, and he wanted to know about the eagle. I took photographs of it and sent them off to him. But he told me that Mr. Wallen was one of the founders of the Australian Stock Exchange.
Oh, was he?
Which I didn't know.
No.
Miss Wallen, what did she do in India? What was her work in India? Do you recall?
As far as I know, she was just a Bible teacher.
Yeah.
She was at a place called Dumgutton, I think it was called, in South India. And there's a photograph in that history of her there, all sort of laced up. But you've got a bishop, the Bishop of Tinnevelly, I suppose, with her visiting there. But, they're sort of remote figures in a sense, and
yes.
they're all sort of clobbered up with Western clothing
yes.
and everything else. Yeah. But I know she was and there was another one there. As a matter of fact, I've got this, I think I noted her name. Yes, she was, a Miss Haneker. And she went at the same time, but it doesn't say where she went. More recent days, the Kitchen, the Kitchens, Dr. Kitchen and his wife, they went out as our own missionaries, and of course David Boyd,
yes.
his wife, you see, they were missionaries, of course, and yes, they were quite notable.
Tell us about the kitchen, what you recall.
Yes, well, it's interesting that Elizabeth Kitchen, she was not actually a parishioner in the parish, but when she and Theo married, they came to live in the parish, and they worshipped in the parish for quite a number of years, and then went out as missionaries. Of course, Theo Kitchen, in turn, was the son of a CIM missionary and his wife.
Okay.
And then, of course, his uncle was the famous Dr. Kitchen, who used to preside at the Upwey Convention, which became the Belgrave Heights Convention.
Yes.
Very powerful thing. Theo Kitchen was a man with a great sense of humour, and I can remember that when they were going off, they were first going off as missionaries, they were going over to Adelaide first because originally they'd lived there, or Theo had, and anyhow we all went out and saw them off on the overland train, as it was called then. We had a big assembly down there, and all sorts of demonstrations of affection and all sorts of things there. And then suddenly, in the old days, the whistle blew and the train started to move. Theo and his wife were standing in the doorway, you see, and Theo said, "Oh, I've forgotten my Bible." Now that was his humour, you see.
That's very good.
All
to be missionaries.
All the ceremony, have to be, he'd forgotten his Bible.
Yes.
I thought that was very good.
We were humbled last year when we had a preacher come from Uganda. He runs the theological department at the Uganda University, which the church there had established, and he's here doing some studies himself. He told us all about the Lawrences and how famous they are in Uganda. Of course, that sent most of the congregation scurrying over to the window after the service to actually try and learn a little bit about them. What can you tell us about them?
Well, I can't tell you about. Can't tell you any details about the ministry there. And I told you on the phone. I remember Canon Tom Lawrence coming to speak to us as boys at Launceston Grammar School, and he was the well. He'd been sort of working with that very famous old missionary in Uganda. He was a very he in turn had spoken at the school because the headmaster was a great CMS supporter, and afterwards, in his retiring years, when he retired, he came to St Cobbs. He'd be there every Sunday, and but however, they'd had a very notable ministry, or a very successful one, just in plain missionary work in Uganda. And Tom Lawrence had really carried on the work of this earlier man who'd been very good indeed.
I remember you saying on the phone that Verley Lawrence was a true saint. What do you mean by that? Because I think nowadays it's very, people don't have much idea about what sainthood means.
No, I would say that she would, even although she'd been born to a certain amount of comfort and wealth and so on, she was very careful. She wouldn't spend anything that on herself or anything like that. She used to take a close interest in all CMS affairs, of course, and she gave me the impression that she didn't let the right hand know what the left hand was doing. She, she would be doing lots of things for people, and but on the other hand, you see, I think she would have. She lived with her sister in her sister's home. I think it's got to be said that, you see, she went out as the wife of a missionary in the old CMS tradition, and I don't suppose she had any superannuation or anything. See, I think she would have lived on whatever monies she'd inherited from her father.
Yes, I guess she would have.
And so that I don't think she would have had very much money to spare. But self-effacing in the extreme. She afterwards was in hospital at Broughton Hall, and she became too frail, but perfectly contented in spite of the fact that, as I think I told you on the phone, I remember sometimes I'd be there, they used to serve the evening meal at about 4:30 or something like that, which was awful for her,
Yes.
but she'd never say that. But they used to serve the most discoloured sort of plastic utensils that I've ever seen in my life. I used to feel ashamed knowing the home that she'd come from and the standards they observed. It was really quite dreadful.
Yes. Oh, God.
But however, never a word of complaint. And but constant reminders to me about praying for particular people and particular causes. She was obviously praying all the time,
Yes.
and she was anxious that the parish should be included and that the vicar should do his job and remember to pray. Yes.
Yeah.
Oh yes, I know. She was very good. She really was a sort of person that would never have said anything about anybody.
What sort of man was Tom Lawrence?
All I know is that he was one of the founders of the League of Youth, which of course was founded here in Melbourne by Tom Lawrence and several others, including Alf Stanway.
Yes.
And yes, that's all I know.